The rain had not stopped since the night before, and Adais was on her knees in the courtyard of the Okonkwo estate scrubbing the marble steps by hand when the stranger walked through the gate looking for work. She did not look up at first. She had learned, in 3 years of serving in that great white house with its gold gates and its long black cars, that a girl who looked up at the wrong moment was a girl who got the back of someone's hand. And so she kept her eyes on the gray water running pink with the dye of the cheap soap, and she scrubbed. And she did not see the face of the man who would change everything until he was already standing over her, his shadow falling across the wet stone. "Sister," he said, and his voice was low and gentle. "They told me at the gate to come around the back. Is this the house that is hiring men to dig the new borehole?" She looked up then. He was a tall man, 30 years old or near it, broad through the shoulders, with short, neat black hair and a clean, strong jaw shadowed with a few days of stubble, and rich, deep brown skin gone darker still in the rain. He wore a plain, off-white work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow and the collar soaked through, simple gray trousers patched at one knee, and a pair of worn brown leather sandals that had seen too many roads. A cheap black wristwatch hung loose on his wrist. Everything about him said poor, said hungry, said another desperate man come to a rich family's gate to break his back for a handful of naira. But his eyes did not match the rest of him. They were warm, dark brown eyes, calm and unhurried, and they looked at her not the way the men of that house looked at a serving girl, but the way you look at a person. She had forgotten, almost, that she was a person. It surprised her so much that she answered him plainly, which she did not do with strangers. "This is the house," she said, "but you have come on a bad day. Madam is in a temper and the master is away in Lagos, and when the master is away, the madam makes the whole compound suffer for it." She wrung the rag into the bucket. "If you want the work, go and wait by the generator house and do not let her see you standing idle. They do not pay men to stand." "Thank you, sister." He did not move at once. He looked at her hands, raw and pruned from the cold water, and at the marble steps that stretched up to a door taller than 2 men, and something passed over his face that she could not read and did not try to. "What is your name?" "They call me girl," she said, "or they call me you. My name does not get much use here." She said it without bitterness, the way a person states the weather, and she bent back to the steps. "Go on now, before someone sees us talking and decides I am the reason the borehole is not yet dug." He went, but he looked back once, and she felt it on the back of her neck like the first warmth of a sun that had been hidden a long time, and she did not understand why her heart, which she had taught so carefully to feel nothing, had moved. A voice cut across the courtyard before she could wonder at it. "Girl, girl, are you scrubbing those steps or are you sleeping on them?" It was Madam, on the upper balcony in her morning wrapper, looking down with the particular pleasure she took in finding fault before breakfast. And who was that man? Did I tell you to stand in my courtyard gossiping with laborers? Did I? When you have finished those steps, you will do them again, because I can see from up here that you have left streaks. And a girl who cannot even clean a step has no business opening her mouth to a stranger. Adais lowered her head and said, "Yes, madam," and "No, madam," in the right places. And she did the steps again, though there were no streaks, and the rain came back while she did them, and the water ran down the back of her neck and into her thin wrapper. And she did not complain, because complaint was a luxury, like pride, that a girl with nowhere to go could not afford. She had learned to take her small comforts where the great house could not reach them. The smell of rain on hot stone, the few minutes at dawn before anyone woke, the warmth that had passed between her and a poor stranger for the space of a breath. These were hers, and Madame did not know they existed, and so could not take them away. Her name was Adèse, which means daughter of a king, and it was the cruelest joke her dead mother could have left her, because she had never in her life been treated as anything but the least of the least. She was 24 years old. She was slender, almost thin, 5 feet and 5 inches. With natural dark hair she kept tied back in a modest, faded head wrap. Large dark eyes that had once been told they were beautiful, before life taught her to keep them lowered, and deep brown skin, and a face that was kind and far too tired for a woman so young. She wore the same plain faded blue Ankara wrapper every day, and a pair of rubber slippers worn down at the heel. And she had 2 other wrappers, exactly like it, folded in the tin box under the iron bed she shared with the cook's daughter in the servants' quarters behind the kitchen. That tin box held everything she owned in the world. A Bible with her mother's name in the front. A photograph of her mother, young and laughing, taken before Adèse was born. And a single thing that did not seem to belong with the rest of her poverty, wrapped in a square of cloth at the very bottom, that she took out only when she was certain she was alone. She had come to the Okonkwo estate 3 years before, after the fever took her mother and the rent came due, and there was nowhere else for an orphan girl with no family and no money to go. Madame Chinyere Okonkwo had hired her because she was cheap, and she was quiet, and she did not eat much. And from the first week, Madame had made it her business to remind Adèse every single day of exactly how little she was worth. Madame Chinyere was a heavy, handsome woman of 50 with a loud laugh she used like a slap in gold on every finger. And she ruled the estate while her husband traveled, which was often. And she ruled it the way a small, cruel god rules a small, frightened world. She had 2 daughters, Obioma and Adaku, grown women in their 20s, idle and bright as parrots and twice as mean, who lay about the cool, tiled rooms all day complaining of boredom, and whose chief entertainment, when the boredom grew too great, was Adèse. They had a game. They would summon her from whatever she was doing and order her to do some impossible or pointless thing. And then they would find fault with how she did it and laugh, the 3 of them, mother and daughters together, until the laughter rang off the high ceilings of that beautiful, empty house. Fetch water in the cracked pot, the one that leaks, and do not spill a drop. Iron these 40 dresses again, they are not crisp enough. Kneel and ask forgiveness for breaking the cup, even though it was Adaku who knocked it from the table. And Adèse knelt, and Adèse ironed, and Adèse carried the cracked pot across the muddy yard with the water running out of it down her wrapper, because she had learned that the only thing worse than their cruelty was their cruelty when she resisted it. And because a girl with nowhere to go does not have the luxury of pride, there had been a day, not long before the stranger came, that showed the whole shape of that house in a single hour. Adaku had a suitor coming, a young man from a good family, and the morning of his visit she could not find the gold earrings she wanted. And rather than admit she had misplaced them, she announced loudly that the girl had stolen them. Madame came at once, scenting blood, and they searched Adèse's tin box, turned it out on the floor of the servants' quarters in front of the other staff, the Bible and the photograph and the wrapped cloth tumbling onto the bare cement. And Adèse stood and watched the only things she owned handled by people who despised her. And she said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The earrings were not there, of course. They were found an hour later in the pocket of a dress Adaku herself had worn the night before. No one apologized. Madame simply turned and walked away, and Adaku laughed and said, "Well, she could have stolen them." And that was the end of it. But Adaeze had seen something in that hour, kneeling to gather her mother's photograph off the cement before a careless foot could find it. She had seen that these were people who would always, given the smallest reason or none, choose to believe the worst of her, and that no amount of faithful service would ever change it, because her usefulness to them was not as a worker, but as a thing to look down upon. A house needs someone at the bottom for the people above to feel tall. She had simply been born poor enough to be that someone. She gathered her things back into the box, and she wrapped the coral pendant in its cloth, and she breathed, and she went back to work. But she had not lost everything they tried to take from her. At night, when the great house finally went dark, and the only sound was the rain on the tin roof of the quarters and the soft breathing of the cook's daughter beside her, Adaeze would take the thing from the bottom of the tin box, the thing wrapped in cloth, and she would unwrap it in the dark and hold it. And she would remember that her mother had told her, with the very last strength in her body, that this small thing meant she was not nobody, no matter what anyone ever said. She did not fully understand it, but she believed her mother, because believing her mother was the last thing she had left to do for her. And so she held it, and she breathed. And in the morning she put it away, and went back to being girl, and you, and the least of the least. The stranger got the work. His name, he told the foreman, was Emeka, and he could dig. And he asked for no more than the going rate. And so they put a shovel in his hands and set him to breaking the wet red earth at the bottom of the garden, where the new borehole was to go. Adaeze watched him from the kitchen window when she could, which was not often, and she told herself it was only that there was little else to look at. He worked from first light to dark without complaint. He was stronger than any two of the other laborers, and he never once boasted of it. And he was kind to the other men in a way she had never seen a strong man be kind, sharing his water, taking the heaviest part of the load, laughing low at his own expense to put the nervous young ones at ease. The foreman, who was a hard man, softened around him without seeming to know it. The other laborers began, within days, to look to him before they looked to the foreman. There was something in him, some quiet authority that did not come from his patched trousers or his cheap watch. And Adaeze felt it, and could not name it, and did not yet let herself wonder where it came from. What she let herself do was bring him water. It was a small thing, and dangerous, because Madame did not like the servants to mix with the day laborers. But the men working the borehole needed water, and someone had to carry it, and Adaeze made certain that someone was her. She would set the tin cup down beside Emeka where he worked, and she would not stay, because staying was asking for trouble. But in the few seconds it took for him to drink, they would speak. And those few seconds became, without her quite deciding it, the part of the day she lived for. He asked her questions no one had ever asked her. Not what was her name now, because he knew it. But what did she love when she was small, before all this? Whether she had ever seen the sea. What she would do if she could do anything in the whole world, and no one was watching to laugh. And Adaeze, who had not been asked her own opinion about anything in years, found the answers rising up in her like water in a dry well after rain, surprising her, because she had thought that part of her was dead. She told him she had loved to sing, in church before her mother died, and that she did not sing any more. She told him she had never seen the sea but had dreamed of it, a great moving thing with no walls. She told him that if no one were watching, she would learn to read better than she could, and she would teach children, because children were the only people in that house who had ever been kind to her, the cook's small ones who did not yet know she was nobody. There was an evening that week she would never forget, small as it was. The cook's youngest child, a boy of 5, had fallen and gashed his knee on the broken concrete by the kitchen, and was screaming the way small children scream when the fear is worse than the hurt. And none of the family stirred from their cool rooms, because a servant's child was beneath their notice. Adaize was washing the great cooking pots, and her hands were full. And it was Emeka who came across the yard, dropped his shovel, and gathered the boy up against his soaked work shirt as though he were his own. He did not shush him or tell him to be brave. He held him, and he pressed his thumb hard above the cut to stop the blood the way a man does who has learned somewhere how to tend a wound. And he talked to the boy low and steady about nothing, about the well he was digging and the cool, sweet water that would come up out of it, until the screaming turned to hiccups, and the hiccups turned to wonder. Adaize watched from the kitchen door with her wet hands dripping, and something in her chest that had been shut for 3 years opened the width of a hair. A rich man's son would have called for a driver to take the boy to a clinic and gone back to his wine. This poor man with the patched knee simply knelt in the dirt and held a crying child who could do nothing for him in return. And Adaize understood, watching him, that she was looking at the rarest thing in the whole world. Rarer than gold, rarer than anything in that great house, and she did not yet have a word for it. But the word was goodness, and it had come to her gate in the rain, wearing worn sandals. "You are not nobody," Emeka said. He had stopped drinking. He was looking at her with those calm, warm eyes, and the rain had stopped for once, and the late sun was on the wet garden. And he said it again, quietly, like a fact he was certain of. "Whoever told you that you are, nobody told you a lie. And one day God is going to prove it to the whole world. And I hope I am there to see their faces when He does." She did not have an answer for that. She picked up the empty cup and she walked back to the kitchen with her heart going hard in her chest. And she did not let herself believe him, because hope was the most dangerous thing of all, and she had survived this long by not having any. But that night she took the thing from the tin box and held it longer than usual. And for the first time in 3 years, lying in the dark, Adaize let herself imagine a different life. Just for a moment, before she put the imagining away with the wrapped cloth and made herself sleep. If you have come this far into Adaize's story, take a moment now and subscribe to this channel, because what is coming next is the part I have been waiting to tell you. The part where everything this proud family believed about the poor girl on her knees and the poor man with the shovel turns over, and nothing in that great white house is ever the same again. And if you believe, as I do, that God lifts up the humble and brings down the proud, then comment the words Team Adaize below, so I know you are walking this road with her. Now let us go on, because the day everything changed began like any other, with rain and with cruelty, and with no warning at all of what God was about to do. It was Obioma's idea, the thing that broke open the secret, though she meant it only as a new way to be cruel. The borehole was nearly finished, and Madame had decided to throw a great party to celebrate. A gala in the grand reception hall with the chandeliers and the imported wine, to show the other rich families of the town that the Okonkwo's now had their own private water and did not depend on the public taps like common people. The whole house was turned upside down preparing for it. And Obioma, lying on the long sofa filing her nails, while Adaize polished the floor on her hands and knees, was struck by a thought so funny to her that she sat straight up. "Mama," she called out, "Mama, I have had the most wonderful idea. We should invite the girl to the party." Madame Chinyere came in from the next room, and Adaku drifted in behind her. And the three of them looked down at Adaize on the floor. And Adaize kept polishing and pretended she had not heard, because hearing was dangerous. "Invite her? Madam said. "Have you lost your senses?" "As a joke, Mama. Think how funny. We dress her up in one of our old gowns, the ugly red one nobody wants, and we let her come down the stairs in front of all those important people as if she were a real lady. And then, at the right moment, we tell everyone the truth, that she is nothing but the floor scrubber, the orphan we feed out of charity, and we watch her face. Can you imagine? She will die of shame. It will be the best part of the whole party." And Madame Cinieri laughed, the loud laugh she used like a slap. And Adaku clapped her hands, and it was decided, the way everything in that house was decided, over the body of the girl on the floor, as if she were a piece of the furniture they were arranging. They would humiliate her in front of the entire town. They would dress her like a lady only to strip her bare in public, for sport. Adaez said nothing. She finished the floor. She carried the bucket out to the yard, and she stood in the rain a moment where no one could see her face. And then she did what she had always done, which was to fold the paint up small and put it away and keep going. But that evening she found Ameka at the borehole as the men were packing up their tools in the dusk. And she told him, because he was the only person in the world she had to tell. She did not cry. She was past crying. She just told him plainly what they meant to do to her at the party. And she watched his face, expecting him to flinch from it, to be embarrassed for her, to look at her with a pity that was its own kind of insult. He did not. Something happened in his face when she told him, something she had never seen there before. The warmth in his eyes did not go out, but underneath it, like iron under cloth, she saw the thing she had felt in him from the beginning, the quiet authority. And now for the first time, she saw that it was not gentleness only. There was a stillness in him that was very close to anger, the anger of a man who has the power to act and is deciding, in that moment, exactly how and when to use it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked her one question. "This party," he said. "When is it?" "Saturday, 3 days from now." She did not know why he wanted to know. Why? "Will you go?" "What choice do I have?" She gave a small, tired laugh that had no laughter in it. A girl with nowhere to go does as she's told. They will dress me, and they will laugh, and the whole town will laugh, and on Monday I will scrub the floor again. It is only one more thing. I have survived worse. But even as she said it, she felt how much this one would cost her. To be made a fool of in front of everyone. To have the last small private dignity she had hidden away, dragged out into the light and spat upon. And her voice caught on the last word despite her, and she turned her face away. Adasa. It was the first time he had used her name. She turned back. He was looking at her with an expression she would remember for the rest of her life, steady and certain and full of something she had no word for. "Go to the party," he said. "Let them dress you. Walk down those stairs with your head up, because you are the daughter of a king. That is what your name means. And on Saturday night, I am going to make sure that everyone in that hall learns it. Do you trust me?" It was an impossible thing to ask. She had known him 3 weeks. He was a day laborer with a patched knee and a borrowed shovel. And he was promising her, against all sense, that he would stand between her and the cruelty of the most powerful family she had ever known. And yet, she looked at him in the failing light, and she thought of all the small kindnesses, the water, the questions, the way he had said, "You are not nobody," as if he knew it for a fact, and against every hard lesson 3 years of suffering had taught her, against the iron rule of hopelessness that had kept her alive. Adaze felt the things she had forbidden herself rise up in her chest and refuse to be put away. "I do not know why," she said. But I do. God help me, I do. Then go home and sleep, he said gently. And do not be afraid. The night they mean to break you is going to be the night you are set free. I promise it on my mother's grave. She did not understand. She would not understand until Saturday. But she went home, and she lay in the dark. And she did not take the thing from the tin box because, for the first time in 3 years, she did not need to hold a small, dead promise to remember that she was somebody. A living man had told her so. And she breathed, slow and deep. And somewhere underneath the fear, like the first green of a seed that does not yet know it will be a tree, something in Adais began, very quietly, to hope. What Adais did not know, what no one in that house knew, was the truth about the man digging their borehole. His name truly was Emeka, but the rest of it was a thing the Okonkwo's would have fallen to the floor to hear. He was Emeka, the only son and heir of the Adigwe family, of the Adigwe oil fortune, one of the 3 richest families in the entire country. His late father had built an empire out of nothing and had raised his son to understand that money without character was a curse. And on his deathbed, the old man had taken his son's hand and asked him for one thing. Find a wife who loves you for nothing, the old man had said. Not for the houses or the cars or the name. Find the one woman who would love you if you had nothing in the world. Because that is the only love that will not turn to poison when I am gone and the vultures come. And Emeka had buried his father and had looked at the women of his own world, the bright, hard, beautiful daughters of the other rich families who looked at him and saw only the fortune behind his face. And he had made a decision that his uncles called madness. He had put off the fine clothes and the cars and the name, and he had gone out into the country as a poor laborer to find the hard way, a heart that was true. He had not expected to find it on his knees in the rain in the courtyard of a cruel proud house, in a serving girl that everyone treated as nothing. But he had watched Adasa for 3 weeks. He had watched her carry the cracked pot and never complain. He had watched her save the smallest, sweetest fruit from her own poor meal to give to the cook's hungry children. He had watched her be mocked and struck and worked half to death. And he had watched her remain, somehow, through all of it, kind, gentle, unbroken, dignified in a way that no money on earth could buy. And that the idle daughters of the house, with all their gold, did not possess one thread of. And Emeka, the heir of the Adigwe fortune, had come at last to the end of his long search, and had found his father's one true heart in the last place on earth the proud would ever think to look. He had only been waiting for the right moment to reveal it. The Okonkwo's, in their cruelty, were about to hand him that moment themselves. Saturday came. The great house blazed with light. Every important family for 100 miles arrived in their long cars and their finest cloth. The men in flowing agbada and the women in lace and gold. And the chandeliers threw their light down on the marble, where Adiezi had bled her knees. And the imported wine flowed, and Madame Chinyere stood at the top of her grand staircase in crimson and gold, receiving them all like a queen. And in a small, hot room at the back of the house, Obioma and Adaku were dressing the girl. They did it cruelly as they could, because the cruelty was the point. They pulled the head wrap from her hair and yanked a comb through it, laughing at the snags. They forced her into the red gown, an old beaded thing the color of deep wine that they had decided was ugly years ago. Though on Adaisa's slender frame it was not ugly at all, a fact that annoyed them and made them crueler still. They smeared lipstick on her and stood back and shrieked with laughter. They told her, in detail, what was going to happen, how they would let her stand there a few minutes basking in the attention like the fool she was. And then how Madame would call for silence and announce to the whole assembled town that this creature in the borrowed gown was nothing but the floor scrubber, the charity orphan, and how everyone would laugh, and how she would have to stand there and take it. "Do not think of running," Adaku said, pinning a cheap red flower in her hair too hard so it scratched. "If you run, you are finished here, and where will you go? You have nobody. You are nobody. Remember that when you are standing up there." And then they pushed her out to the top of the grand staircase, into the light and the noise and the upturned faces, and they stepped back into the shadows of the landing to watch her fall. A daisy stood at the top of the stairs. Below her, the great hall full of strangers turned to look. The talk faltered. Glasses paused halfway to lips. For one terrible moment, she felt every eye in that room land on her. The orphan in the wine-red gown. And the old shame rose up to swallow her whole, the lifelong certainty that she was nothing, that she did not belong in the light, that any second now the laughter would come and prove it. Her knees wanted to buckle. Her eyes wanted to drop. 3 years of being told she was nobody pulled at her like hands trying to drag her down the stairs and out the back door where she belonged. And then, across the sea of staring faces, she found him. Emika was standing at the foot of the staircase. But it was not the Emika she knew. Gone were the patched trousers and the off-white work shirt and the worn sandals. He stood in gold-embroidered red Isiagu chief's regalia, the lion cloth heavy and rich across his broad shoulders, a red coral bead necklace at his throat, and a coral bead cap upon his head and coral beads at his wrists, the regalia of a great man, of a king's son. And even the richest families in that room had gone silent and were staring at him. Because they knew, every one of them knew, exactly whose heir wore those beads. And in the midst of all that wealth and power, Emeka Adigwe was looking up the stairs at Adai's, at the floor scrubber in the borrowed gown, and he was smiling at her the way a man smiles at the answer to his every prayer. And he lifted his hand toward her, and his voice rang out clear and strong across the silent hall, so that every soul in that room heard it. "There she is," he said. "There is the woman I have been searching the whole country to find. Come down, Adais. Come down and let them see you." The hall erupted in whispers. Adaize stood frozen, her hand at her throat, not understanding, her eyes locked on his. And in the shadows of the landing behind her, she heard Obioma make a small, strangled sound, and she heard Adaku whisper, "That is the Adigwe heir. That is impossible. That is the laborer. That is the man who dug the borehole," in a voice climbing toward panic. But Adaize heard all of it from very far away, because Emeka was holding out his hand and looking at her as if she were the only person in the world. And so she did the bravest thing she had ever done. She lifted her chin. And as she stood at the top of those stairs, a strange calm came over her. The calm of a person who has carried a heavy thing for a long time and is about to be allowed, finally, to set it down. She thought of her mother, dying in a rented room, pressing the small wrapped pendant into her hand and using the last air in her body to say words a child could not then understand. "You are somebody, my daughter. No matter what they tell you, you are somebody. Do not let them make you small." She had held those words in the dark for 3 years, like a coal she was afraid would go out. She had never once believed them, not truly, not in the daylight where the marble was cold under her knees and the laughter rang off the high ceilings. And now a man in a king's regalia was standing at the bottom of the stairs, calling her by her name in front of the whole proud town. And her mother's words were turning before her eyes, from a desperate hope into a fact. And Adaize understood that her mother had not been comforting her with a lie. Her mother had been telling her a secret. She remembered, finally, all the way down to the bottom of her, what that secret was. And the daughter of a king walked down the grand staircase of the house where she had been a slave, through a hall full of the most powerful people in the land, with her head held high, to the man who had come in rags to find her. She walked slowly. She did not hurry, though every nerve in her wanted to run to him. She let them look. She let every person who had ever called her nobody, every important face that had ever passed her in that hall without seeing her, look upon the floor scrubber in the wine-red gown and understand, in the slow length of those stairs, that they had been wrong about her, all of them, for years, and that the wrongness was their shame and not hers. She had scrubbed every one of those steps on her knees. Now she came down them on her feet, like a woman, like a lady, like the things she had been all along. He took her hand at the bottom of the stairs. He turned with her to face the silent, astonished crowd, and to face Madame Chenier, who had come halfway down from her own landing and stopped, her painted face gone gray, her loud laugh nowhere now. And Emeka spoke, and though his voice was quiet, the whole hall hung on every word. "My name is Emeka Adigwe," he said. "Some of you knew my late father. He built everything our family has out of nothing but his 2 hands and his good name. And before he died, he asked me to find a wife who would love me if I had nothing at all. So I put away my name and my father's wealth, and I went out as a poor man with a shovel to dig wells. Because a poor man learns the truth about people that a rich man never can. I came to this house 3 weeks ago." He looked now at Madame Chenier and at Obioma and Adaku creeping down behind her, and his voice did not rise, but it went hard as the marble under their feet. "And I learned the truth about this house. I watched how the people of this family treat those they believe can do nothing for them. I watched these 3 women mock and starve and strike a girl whose only crime was that she was poor and alone and had nowhere to go. And I watched that girl, with nothing in the world, share her last food with hungry children and bear cruelty without becoming cruel, and keep her dignity when everyone around her tried to take it from her. I came to this country looking for the richest heart in the land. I have found it, and it does not beat in any of you." The silence in that hall was the silence of 100 rich people, realizing they had just watched the most powerful young man any of them knew choose a floor scrubber over every daughter they had brought to be admired and condemn, in front of the whole town, the proud family that had thought to make sport of her. Madame Cheniere's mouth worked, but no sound came. And then Emeka turned away from her, as if she were not worth another word, which was the cruelest thing he could have done and the only thing she deserved. And he looked only at Adas. "Forgive me," he said, low now, just for her, though the silent hall heard it too. "Forgive me for letting them dress you and frighten you, even for an hour. I needed them to show this whole town who they truly are, and who you truly are, with their own hands. You walked down those stairs like a queen, because that is what you are." He reached into the fold of his regalia and brought out something small, and a daisy's breath stopped, because she knew it. She knew it before her mind could believe it. It was wrapped in a square of cloth. It was the twin of the thing at the bottom of her tin box. "My father," Emeka said, "had a brother, long ago, who married a woman his family thought beneath him, and was cast out for it, and disappeared into poverty, and the family lost all trace of him. My father grieved that brother his whole life and never stopped searching. He had 2 of these made before the quarrel, one for himself and one for the brother he loved. A coral pendant with our family mark. He told me, "Find my brother's child, if any child remains, and make right what our pride destroyed." He opened the cloth. The coral pendant lay in his palm, deep red, carved with a mark. And it was the same. It was exactly the same. "When I saw the one your mother left you," he said softly, "the night I came to the borehole and you trusted me, I saw it through the window in your hand. And I knew. Thus, daughter of a king, you are not a servant in this house. You are the daughter of my father's lost brother. You are my blood. You are an Adigwe, and you have been one all along, on your knees in the rain, while these people called you nobody." Adiza's legs would not hold her. She put her hand to her own throat, where the chain of her pendant lay hidden beneath a borrowed gown, the last gift of her dying mother, the small dead promise she had held in the dark for 3 years. "You are somebody no matter what they say." And she understood at last what her mother had been trying to tell her, what her mother had perhaps never fully known herself. She was not nobody. She had never been nobody. She had been a daughter of one of the greatest families in the land, hidden by poverty and pride, scrubbing the floors of people who were not fit to carry her water. And the man who had come to tell her so had come the way her own grandfather had been cast out, as a poor man, to prove that love and worth have nothing to do with wealth at all. The whole circle of it, the pride that had destroyed and the kindness that had restored, closed over her, and she wept at last, not from shame, but from the breaking open of a heart that had been closed so long. And Amika caught her hand and held it, and the hall, the rich, proud staring hall, did not laugh. It had forgotten how. What happened to the Okonkwo's happened quickly, and it happened the way such things do, not with violence, but with the simple turning away of the world. By Monday, the whole town knew the story, and the story did not flatter them. The important families who had courted Madame Chinyere's friendship discovered urgent reasons to be elsewhere. The marriages the daughters had hoped for, into the very families that had stood in that hall and watched, quietly did not happen, because no great house wished to bind itself to women the Adigwe heir himself had named, in public, as cruel. Madame Chinyere's husband came home from Lagos to find his wife the laughingstock of the town, and his business partners suddenly cold. For the Adigwe family's reach was long, and though Emeka raised no hand against them and spoke no further word, the simple fact of who he had chosen and who he had refused was a judgment that no amount of gold could buy back. The proud are not always struck down, Adais would learn. Sometimes they are simply left to sit alone in the great empty houses they were so proud of, with no one of consequence willing to climb their marble steps. And that is its own kind of justice, and a heavier one. But this is not their story, and a story should not give the wicked more room than they have earned. This is Adai's story, and Adai's story does not end on those stairs. It begins there. Emeka took her from that house that very night. He did not let her sleep one more hour in the servants' quarters or scrub one more step of that marble. There was a moment before they left that Adais would remember always. She went back to the small hot room behind the kitchen to get her tin box, the only thing in that whole estate that was truly hers, and Emeka came with her. And he watched her lift the lid and take out the Bible with her mother's name in it and the photograph of the young laughing woman she had barely known. And he saw the wrapped cloth at the bottom, the twin of the pendant in his own keeping. And neither of them said anything, because there was nothing left to prove. She did not take the wrappers. She did not take the worn rubber slippers. She left every poor thing the house had given her exactly where it lay. and she walked out through the kitchen and across the courtyard one last time, past the marble steps she had scrubbed on her knees 1,000 times. And she did not look up at the balcony where Madame Chiniere stood watching her go, because the woman on the balcony was no longer anyone whose opinion could touch her. A great car waited at the gold gate that had only ever opened for her to carry out the rubbish. Emeka opened the door for her himself, the way a man opens a door for a queen. And Adais, the daughter of a king, got in, and the gate of the Okonkwo estate closed behind her for the last time, and she was free. He brought her into the world that was hers by right, and the world received her. Not because of the gowns and the cars and the great rooms, though there were those, but because Adais, lifted up at last, did not become for one moment the thing her tormentors had been. The Adigwe aunts and uncles, who had been so certain Emeka's search would end in foolishness, met the lost brother's daughter and were silenced. And then they were won, not by her new clothes, but by the same thing that had won Emeka, the dignity in her that hardship had refined rather than broken. The old grief of the family, the brother cast out for love a generation ago, was at last laid to rest in the person of his granddaughter come home. And there were tears in that great house too, the good kind, the kind that wash a long wound clean. She had spent 3 years watching what wealth did to small souls, and she had decided, on her knees, what kind of woman she would be if God ever lifted her. And now he had, and she kept her word. The first thing she did with money of her own was send for the cook's children, the little ones who had been kind to her when she was nobody, and see them schooled. The first home she made a home where no servant was ever spoken to the way she had been spoken to. The grand staircase she now descended in the deep red of a true lady's gown, with gold at her throat and her natural dark hair dressed and shining. She descended the same way she had descended the borrowed one, with her chin up and her heart, somehow, still gentle, still kind, still the heart of the girl who had saved fruit for hungry children. The glow of the new life never burned the goodness out of her. That was the thing everyone remarked on in the years that followed. She had every reason to become hard, and she chose, every single day, to remain kind. That choice, more than the fortune, more than the name, was the true crown she wore. There was, in those first months, a thing Emeka watched for and did not find, and its absence was the proof to him that he had chosen rightly. He watched to see whether the fortune would change her, whether power would do to Adais what it had done to the women of the Okonkwo house, who had been given everything and had grown small and cruel inside it. He had seen it happen to people before, the way wealth could pour into a narrow soul and harden there like wax in a crack. But it did not happen to her. Money came into Adai's hands and ran straight through them to wherever the need was greatest. And the first time a new servant in their own home dropped a tray and broke a dish and went white with terror. Waiting for the blow, Adazi knelt down beside the frightened girl and helped her gather the pieces and told her, gently, that it was only a dish, that no plate in the world was worth a person's fear. And the girl wept, not from the breaking, but from the unbearable strangeness of kindness from someone who did not have to give it. Emeka, watching from the doorway, knew then past any doubt that his father's last wish had been answered, and more than answered. He had gone looking for a heart that would love him poor. He had found a heart that loved everyone, the cook's children and the frightened servant and the orphan at the gate. A heart that poverty had hollowed out only so that it could hold more. They were married in the spring, in a church filled to the doors, and Adesi sang. She had told Emeka, a lifetime ago at a borehole in the rain, that she had loved to sing before her mother died, and did not sing any more. And on her wedding day, she stood up in the full church in her white and her coral beads, and she sang the hymn her mother had taught her as a small girl. And her voice, unused for so many years, came out clear and strong and unafraid. And there was not a dry eye in that place. Somewhere in the rafters of the church, she felt sure her mother heard it, and her grandfather, the lost brother, cast out for loving above his station, heard it too. And the long wrong that pride had done was, at last, made right. Emeka wept openly in his fine regalia. The great Heir, undone by a serving girl's hymn, and he did not care who saw. In the evening of her old age, many years and many children later, Adaeze would sit on the wide veranda of the home she and Emeka had built. A home that took in the orphaned and the cast out, and the ones the world called nobody. For there were always such children, and there was always room. And she would watch the sun go down red and gold over the country she had once crossed on her knees. She kept two things on the small table beside her chair, where she could touch them. One was her mother's coral pendant, the small dead promise that had turned out to be the truest thing she owned. The other was a cracked clay water pot, the very one she had been made to carry across the muddy yard, the one that leaked, that she had asked Emeka to find and keep, so that she would never forget the girl on her knees in the rain. And when her grandchildren gathered at her feet and asked her, as children do, to tell them again the story of how she met their grandfather, Adaeze would pick up the coral pendant and hold it in her thin hand, and she would smile, and she would tell them that she had been a servant once, the least of the least, on her knees scrubbing marble for people who called her nobody. She would tell them that a poor man with a shovel had come to the gate in the rain and had been the first person in 3 years to ask her name and mean it. She would tell them that the proud had tried to break her in front of the whole town, and that God had used the very moment of their cruelty to lift her up before them all. And she would tell them the thing she most wanted them to carry, the thing that was the whole of what her long life had taught her, which was this: that you can never know, looking at a person, what is truly inside them, or who they truly are, or what God has hidden in them for a day you cannot see. That the poor man at the gate may be a king, and the king on the staircase may be nothing at all, and that the only wealth that does not rot is a kind heart, the one treasure that no one can dress you in and no one can strip from you, that you carry down every staircase, in every gown, whether anyone is watching or not. Then she would set the pendant back on the table beside the cracked pot, in the last of the red and gold light, and she would gather the smallest grandchild into her lap, and the country would go quiet and warm around the home that took in the unwanted. And Adaeze, daughter of a king, would breathe and be at peace. If this story moved you, if you wept with her on those stairs or felt your own heart lift when the daughter of a king walked down through the crowd that came to laugh, then do one thing for me before you go. Tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from, what city, what country, because I love to see how far this road of ours reaches, from one kind heart to another, across all the miles. And remember what Adaeze remembered. When you are on your own knees, in your own rain, and someone tells you that you are nobody, they are lying. God has hidden a crown in you that the proud cannot see. Hold on and keep your heart kind and wait. He is never late.